I think that is, you hit the nail on the head. It's like finding the community, finding the segment that you can serve. It was really easy for me to find who needs to be served, around here. I just mentioned them. That's where these microsites are. They had nothing. You go from nothing to something, and all of a sudden, wow, now we have, Thorn Bay, we've got 75% of the people who live there, all 500 of them or whatever, it's not even 500, 450, do their banking with us. And so we're finding those areas where they need us. And I think that's a huge piece, is like finding that segment, finding where the need is, because that's how we got started, how Tongass got started. We were started by teachers and public workers. The banks would not give the teachers a loan because of their seasonal income. And so they're like, fine, we'll open a credit union, I mean, and so it's like, find the segment, and, and I think maybe those other credit unions have found the segment and where the need is, and then you grow.
Really excited to have Helen Mickel, President and CEO of Tongass Federal Credit Union in Ketchikan, Alaska, join the Credit Union Nation podcast. Helen, thank you so much for joining this afternoon, or for you this morning, I should say.
This morning. I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Tom, for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we always have to, make sure we know our time zones, because you and I, fortunately for me, get to work together a lot, and it's always afternoon here and morning there. I feel like that's how it always works out.
Yeah.
But so you and I have known each other for a number of years now. We first met when you were serving on the small credit union community for CUNA, now known as America's Credit Unions. And since that time, we've worked on a number of projects together. I've gotten to attend and participate in planning sessions for your leadership team. And we're also both involved with the Native American Credit Union Coalition, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. But, Helen, you kind of had your big coming out party last year at GAC, or this past GAC, or was it 2 GACs ago?
It was in 24.
24, yes. 24. And you got to sit on the main stage,
yeah.
And you told the story of, the Metlakatla people that your credit union serves. And so now everyone knows who Helen Mickel is. She's this force in the industry. And so before we get to all that great stuff that your credit union is doing, I think it's always fun to start with you and your personal life. So I'd love to know kind of where you started. You're in Alaska now. You're maybe a native Alaskan, maybe not. What's the secret here? Tell us a little bit about your personal life and growing up in Alaska.
Sure. So I actually, when I was 7 years old, my parents packed up an old white flatbed truck in Salem, Oregon, after my dad got a job as a teacher here in Ketchikan. And we all piled into that truck and our other truck and all of our household belongings, including a freezer full of beef, I think my parents brought with them, and drove all the way up through Canada to Prince Rupert, and got on an Alaska State ferry, and took the 6-hour ferry ride over here to Ketchikan. So I moved here when I was 7 years old. My mom had come up in advance of our trip and found a house for us. Well, it was more of a cabin on the beach. And I'll never forget that. I was thinking about it this morning. When we got to the house, it's about 12 miles out of Ketchikan, out of town. And we had to walk down a big long path to get down to the house. And I still remember standing at the top of the path, 7 years old, and looking down that path and thinking, this is my new home. It was really great. It was a great way to grow up in Southeast Alaska. There are no roads that connect the islands of Southeast Alaska. So we didn't drive anywhere. I mean, that drive and then the ferry and then into Ketchikan. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. Growing up on, it really was a cabin. Our refrigerator was out on the front porch. And I remember running outside and chasing off what I thought was a big dog and turned out to be a black bear from the garbage cans outside. And
Wow.
we lived on the beach, which was very cool to do that. It was actually, it wasn't as cool to a lot of people at that time. It's obviously highly popular to be on the beach now, but yeah, the house started out as a barge that was floated up, and then they just kind of made a cabin out there before there was even the roads out that far. So
Okay.
anyway, this so I grew up here and I love it here. And I had a wonderful opportunity growing up in Ketchikan, going to high school here, being part of, I wasn't a sports person. I was part of the music folks and played French horn and violin and was able to go to Southeast honor bands and orchestras and that was really cool too because I got to go to Petersburg and Haynes and some of the places where our credit union is serving now. And so, and I would never have had a reason to go to those places if it hadn't been for that opportunity. So in Alaska, in Southeast Alaska, you don't hop on a bus and drive to the next town for sporting events or musical festivals. You take a ferry with all your friends and it's kind of awesome, actually. So it was really great to be able to grow up here. A very unique way to grow up. My family also took a job in the summers for 3 summers, and we worked at Steamboat Bay, which is out on the west coast of Southeast Alaska, and worked for New England Fish Company.
Okay.
My dad ran the fuel dock, and my mom ran the store, and so I got really involved in the fishing community during that time. And
Okay.
yeah, I feel blessed. It's been a cool place to be. So
Yeah.
that's me growing up in Alaska. I have lots of stories about that, but I'll leave it there.
I'm sure, and knowing, your credit union story, and also this, the story around Metlakatla and, the importance of fishing in that community and in that culture, it's even more like full circle, sort of stuff that's happening with your credit union now and kind of how you grew up. That's really cool. And definitely a unique childhood experience, right? I mean, I think about my own childhood experience. I never took ferries to, music concerts or or anything like that. Definitely a lot of
Yeah.
car trips and bus trips. Okay, so can you still play the French horn? Do you remember how to play? Do you have a violin laying
I
around?
do have a violin. I do not have a French horn, and I don't still play. I like to fiddle on the piano a little bit, but I like music, but it's not a big part of my life anymore.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll leave you off the hook. You won't have to do a impromptu performance here. Okay, so thank you for sharing about, your childhood and growing up there. Eventually you went to school and, started your professional career. Can you talk a little bit about, your early years professionally and then how you sort of moved into financial services and ultimately credit unions?
Yeah, well, I also had a non-traditional schooling. So I got married when I was 18.
Okay.
And I've been married to the same wonderful man all of these many years, which I will not mention at this moment. But anyway, so yeah, I got married when I was 18. We did a little bit of college locally, and I actually did not get a degree at that time. And but I got started in banking at 19. So I went to work at a local community bank here in Ketchikan, and that was how I got my foot in the door at financial services. But I got to tell you, so when I was growing up, my mom took me to this house one day. Like we're on our way home. I think she picked me up from school, took me to this house, and she said, "I just need to run in here and make a payment." And I'm like, why are you making a payment at someone's house? Like, what's going on here? And she said, oh, this is the credit union. And so I'm going in to make a payment and I'll be right back, and I remember just thinking, what in the world is a credit? What is a credit union? She's like, well, it's kind of like a bank, and whatever explanation she gave me, I don't know. I just heard kind of like a bank. And so she was making a payment there. And so that was, excuse me, that was my first introduction to credit unions. I don't know how old I was, 8 or 9 years old, and we're at this house. Anyway, it turns out that was Wardco Federal Credit Union back in the day, which they partnered with Tongass Federal Credit Union, the credit union obviously that I work for, and helped Tongass get started. But she was making the payment there. And then my next experience in financial services was when I was in the 6th grade and we got to tour a local branch of a community bank. And we went in the branch and they took us in this huge walk-in vault, and they showed us the money. And I'm like, wow, and then, oh, this was awesome. So then we walk in the manager's office, purple velvet couch. Purple velvet couch. And I was just like, now this is what I'm talking about. Like, right, this is financial services. And so credit union in a house, big vault and the purple velvet couch. And the funny thing is the purple velvet couch is where I first started working. So that was the local financial institution where I first got introduced to financial services.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Okay. So, So when was that? That was when you were 19? You said when you got your.
When I started at 19, and I never was a teller. Interestingly enough, I started as more of a loan secretary, new accounts person, and that's how I got started. And I stayed in commercial banking for a long time, 20 years. And
Okay.
almost 20 years. So and I worked for 2 different commercial banks in our local community, and I really liked financial services, but there was always something kind of missing in that. I wanted to do something that meant something, like I knew we were kind of helping people, helping them get into homes, small businesses, all of that stuff. I liked that. I thought it was nice. But I always wanted there to be more. I always wanted to do more and have a job that had a mission. And honestly, I probably would have stayed in financial service or had stayed at community banks. At the last community bank I was at, I was managing 2 branches. I was doing commercial lending. I was an assistant vice president. And there was a little bit of upheaval at that financial institution. And there was a job open at the credit union for a loan manager. Tongass at that time was 24 million in assets. And they were looking for a loan manager. And I was reading about it, and it's like you would run the whole loan department, you get to, write policies and do all this stuff. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. I love lending. And so I went and I applied
So
for
you'd
that
had lending
position.
experience. You had lending experience
I had a
back.
significant amount of lending
Oh,
experience. I
okay.
was a
All right.
commercial lender and consumer lender. Did mortgage lending. Actually, I did all kinds of lending.
I
At
only
the bank.
I
At the
only
bank.
asked. Sorry, I only asked because I do run into a lot of credit unions who are run by CEOs and leaders who've never underwritten a loan before, and
Oh,
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
yeah,
And I can point to certainly many successful credit unions that are run by people who don't have that lending background, but it's more common than you think, and I always find it so curious because when you think about credit unions and financial services in general, the lifeblood of the business is lending, right? Like you have to
right.
be a successful lender to earn revenue to keep the operations going. And so you would think that it would almost be table stakes, but it's not. And I'm not trying to, call anybody out who's never
No.
underwritten a loan before and runs a credit union. But it's just interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other cool thing about credit unions is that there are so many different paths to leadership roles, CEO roles. Like you don't have to be a lender, you don't have to be a finance person. I mean, I know people who started in IT who became the CEOs of their credit
Oh,
union
yeah.
or marketing too. And so I just think that's cool. Anyway,
Yeah.
I didn't
There's
mean to interrupt.
the different strengths bring different things to that role. And so, but yeah, but my background was in lending and I love lending. In fact, anybody who doesn't love lending, I'm kind of like, what? I don't, because I just think it's so cool. You're helping people buy houses, you're helping people get their businesses going, you're helping people get transportation and get on the road. I love it. I love lending. So anyway, I got hired as the loan manager back then. Susan Fisher was our CEO. I think there's probably some people who remember Susan. She's a lot of fun and a little bit crazy, but she in a really good way. So anyway, she taught me what it meant to be a credit union. And I think that working with her was just a really wonderful experience. And the interesting thing, but she had been the CEO at Tongass for, I think, about a year when she hired me. And a couple of years before that, I was at the last community bank that I was working at. And one of the board members from Tongass happened to also have an account at that bank because he was a business person and we weren't doing as much business lending here and accounts at the credit union. And he came up to me, and it was when it was still open before they'd hired Susan. And he said, "Have you ever thought about being the CEO at Tongass Federal Credit Union?" And I found him recently and said, "I'm really glad you said that because you know what? I don't know that I would ever have thought I could be the CEO at Tongass Federal Credit Union if you hadn't said that to me." And he was kind of blown away that I remembered that. But yeah, he had come in and asked me that question. Thank goodness I didn't try to be the CEO then, though, because Susan taught me some really important lessons about being in a credit union. And so my experience with Susan was great. I remember one day she was talking with a member and helping them out and said, "Well, I'll see you around the credit union." And there was something about hearing, "I'll see you around the credit union," that helped me realize, like, it's a lot different than at the bank. We have member owners. The people who bank with us, who do business with us, own and are a part of something here that is really missional. And we can do things that maybe doesn't always make the most economic sense, but the best sense for our members. And I really loved that part of being at the credit union. I could see finally where I had been. I like financial services. I like helping people. All of a sudden it was like, oh, wait a minute. I think there's something bigger here that I'm just starting to recognize. And so I really appreciated being able to work for Susan and learn from her what that difference really is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any examples of like members that you helped out or in those early days when you were running the loan department, of, things that, maybe it was their first car or it was their first house or, they were coming to the credit union as a last resort, like any sort of those stories stand out?
That's a long time ago, Tom. I have more recent
That's
stories,
only
but
what, 10 years ago, 10, 12 years?
yeah, that was just a few years ago. I do remember a small business coming in that had been rejected by some banks, and we were able to help them with a loan that normally they wouldn't have been able to get. And there were so many situations, a lot of situations where we were able to help people get into homes. So yeah, I had to think for a minute. It's coming back to me. But there, in Alaska, it's pretty tough to build up here. And so there are some neighborhoods that are nicer than others and whatnot, but it is not uncommon to have our beach cabin that I grew up in next to a mansion on, you know what I mean?
Sure.
By the way, my parents built a new house there, but anyway, but so that's not uncommon. So you could have a Quonset hut on a piece of land and you're not going to get a conventional loan for it. And so when I came to work at Tongass, we weren't doing very much in the way of real estate, mortgages. And so I really turned up the heat on doing real estate, home loans, home equity loans, home equity lines of credit. That was one of the first changes that I brought when I came to the credit union. And that was fun because it's like they weren't able to necessarily get a conventional loan on that 1969 single wide trailer that was sitting on a piece of land, but they needed the money to be able to finance the improvements they wanted to do to that house or to their home. And we were able to do that. And I loved it. I'm like, we'll lend on, partial structures, this structure, that structure. We did help somebody finish, we helped more than somebody. There's somebody in mind I was thinking of, but we had helped several people who had started building their own house out of their own pocket. And they'd come in, we don't know what to do, and the bank will only do a conventional construction loan for us. And I'm like, I can help you. I loved that, and so we did a lot of that. And if I went back and looked at what happened with real estate loans at Tongass in just a few years, they absolutely spiked because we were providing services that no one else was doing. And I think that is what credit unions do, right? We provide services that others won't do. We provide services to others that people don't want, or banks maybe don't want. And so that's what I love about credit union is like, wait, you can, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that loan that helps you finish off that house or finances that 1969 single wide, or even that, 1999 whatever Subaru.
Right.
So we're doing those things for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like your previous employer, gave you a lot of flexibility, I guess I would say, and a lot of trust, to build out these ideas and build on these programs. And I think that, that there's a lot to be said about sort of, giving someone that leeway or
Mhm.
empowering them to, build something that they're passionate about. I think that, those programs tend to be more successful because you have someone who's really invested in doing it, right? You're not
Mhm.
telling someone to do something, you're allowing them to, pursue something that's important to them. And
And
I think,
yeah,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think that's a really powerful lesson that hopefully leaders who are listening follow because it obviously
And
worked.
yeah, I'll follow up with that when we were talking about the different kinds of CEOs. So Susan, who was my former CEO, did not have any lending background. She was an operations manager before she
Okay.
became the CEO. And so I think you're right. She gave me so much leeway. It's like she hired me because that I came with all three like consumer mortgage and business lending experience. And then
Mhm.
she was just like, go do it,
Mm.
and just supported me 100%. And we had a wonderful, both of us felt like we had a partnership from the beginning, and it really was a great way for me to be introduced to the credit union movement, and then also be able to act out on the things that I felt passionate about too.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question for you is so you discovered the world of credit unions, truly when you moved over to Tongass, and you saw that you had this flexibility and there was also sort of like this added benefit of being a part of something bigger, like the thing that maybe was missing from your work in the bank on the banking side. But that was just one credit union. That was just, maybe your experience with Tongass. At what point did you start engaging with the broader credit union movement across the United States? And like, when did you know that there was sort of this movement that you could belong to that was more than just Tongass? And I think, what makes it even more interesting and why I'm even more curious about it is because you're in Alaska, right? You're a lot further from, the rest of the industry and the rest of the movement. And so just curious how that all unfolded and that.
Well, I will say, so a few things. Susan, again, always called it a movement. And which I from the beginning was kind of like, what? A movement, it's not an industry, it's a movement. Like she was very credit union woman.
Mhm.
And so it was always the credit union movement. And I think a couple things happened. One of the first things that happened when I came to work here is there were no templates or anything for policies. I knew I would be writing the policies, and I was extremely familiar with the policies from the recent bank I had left. And I was prepared to start writing them. And so we were kind of talking about writing policies, updating the ones that we had. And she said, let me call Sandy up at Alps Federal Credit Union, and we'll get James Weilman, for those who know him here, to send you over a copy of their policies. And I was like, I'm not, if actually she said, you do that, you do that. I'm like, I'm not doing that. You would never do that in a bank. You don't call the competition.
Right.
And she, as only Susan could do it, she'd be like, oh, and she just grabbed her phone and called her right then and said, hey, we need to get your policy. Yeah, Helen needs it. This is her email address. And I was like, okay, and then they got on this nice, happy, fun conversation. She was friends with Sandy. It was the first Sandy. Sandy Riggs was the last Sandy. But anyway, so she got on there, and here come these policies. And so I think that was one of the ways that I started to really recognize how different the credit union movement was. My experience with other banks was at Halloween, we dressed up at one bank and we walked across the street to what's now Wells Fargo, and to show off our Halloween costumes. And all we did is walk across the street and stare at each other for a few awkward moments. Like that was collaboration. But anyway, so this was great. And then Susan got me going to Western Credit Union. It's Credit Union Management School now.
Yeah.
I went to WCMS, and that was absolutely fantastic, wonderful. I mentioned that I did not have a degree earlier when, I had, 18 or like a year and a half worth of college credits or whatever, but I went to Western CUNA Management School, and they took that you can get college credits for that. And I'd been taking courses all along for several years. But WCMS really reinvigorated me to get my degree, because I knew, Susan was older than me, and I knew I wanted to be the CEO. And I didn't want the board to have to make a decision based on whether or not I had a business degree. And so
Sure.
going to WCMS, I took the credits that I earned there and transferred them over, and that gave me kind of the impetus to restart and finish up getting my degree. But it
Okay.
also really, gave me that broader credit, the question you had, the broader credit union movement and experience and networking and getting to know people. And I'm a huge fan of WCMS and what it did for me. And I am so much a fan that I am now sending people regularly to school as well.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, there is not a CUNA management school, whether it's Western, the one here in Madison, and then even I think there's Southwestern and Southeastern. I think there are four, I believe. And I have never heard, anyone say that any of the programs are not worth it, right? Like I've always heard, that the content, the faculty, everyone is amazing. And I think it's maybe one of the brightest spots of our industry is that we have these leadership programs that are training and developing sort of the future leaders of the industry. And it's really built on, legacy leadership coming back and imparting the wisdom that they've gained throughout their careers, right? So I think that's really special and something that I think is really valuable for our industry and probably something that should be built upon even further. It would be a great investment. And then, the other thing that I always think about with these schools is that it's not just the content and sort of the principles that you're learning, but it's also the network. It's the
Mhm.
people who you go through the program with and that you graduate with who become sort of this network and this resource for you throughout the rest of your career. I mean, I've heard some longtime credit union leaders talk about people they met at CUNA Management School 30 years ago still being the person that they call up when they have an issue. Like
Mhm.
how amazing is that? So those programs truly are really impactful and really powerful. I was going to ask you about your trajectory to the CEO's role, right? So at some point, it sounds like you had made the decision that you wanted to become the CEO of Tongass. So what was it that made you want to become CEO? And has the job lived up to your expectations? Are you loving life as a CEO these days?
I am loving life as a CEO, and I wanted to be the CEO probably from about, I don't know, the first year after I'd been here.
Mm,
I really, that was on my radar. And Susan, I think she knew that. We had a great relationship. And so I was able to make that transition when she retired in 2015. So I've been the CEO for 10 years now.
mm,
And I've loved every minute of it. I took some things that I learned from Susan and some of the many, many ideas that I had of my own, and just kind of have grown them from there, and including our community microsites, opening the commons at TFCU, which is our business development and resource center,
mm.
and partnerships and collaborations that have helped us grow the commons as well. And so it's been wonderful. I love what we're doing, and I love trying to find creative ways to serve in areas like our community microsites. We had opened a few locations before Susan retired, but they were all opened because people asked us to come, which is really cool. Like
Yeah.
Metlakatla, I talked about that at GAC, and they sent a group of folks over, asked us to come to their community to open a location. And then we had the community of Thorn Bay ask us to come. The community of Kloak asked us to come. And then we really didn't do anything after that. And I started thinking, just because people aren't asking doesn't mean they don't need us. And Thorn Bay has 500 people. I'm sure these other tiny communities, villages, native villages around Southeast Alaska would never dream to ask. And so I started reaching out to them. Hey, do you want financial services? And I thought it was going to be a tough sell, the community microsites, because the way those work, we ask for free rent. We hire somebody locally. It's part-time, and I thought, who's going to give me free rent? Doors just kept opening for us to open these community microsites. So people would have local financial services. Like I said, there's no roads that connect our communities in Southeast Alaska. So if you live in Cake, Alaska, and Tongass isn't sitting there with you, you're flying to Juneau or ferrying to Juneau to go, and you're spending at least $500 probably round trip on a seaplane to go do in-person services. And a lot of the people in Cake, when we were looking at Cake, I remember somebody coming up to me from the community, and I was like, hey, what do you think? I'm thinking about checking to see if we should open a microsite there. And I told her all about what it meant and everything. And she's like, I hope you do. She said, I have so many of my nieces and nephews. They're like, Auntie, can I borrow your debit card to buy something on Amazon? Auntie, can I borrow your debit card? And she's like, they need their own debit cards. I'm like, well, we'll be bringing in instant issue machines and getting them their own debit cards. And so it's been wonderful. That's something that I never would have happened working at a bank, opening in communities with, just 500-600 people and providing services, erasing banking deserts in communities like Cake and Hoonah and Yakutat. It's Thorn Bay, Heidelberg, those were our first two. So it's exciting. It's exciting to be able to do that work.
Yeah, I think in the show notes, I'm definitely going to include links to, some of the places where you've had the opportunity to share about, the microsites and the work in Metlakatla and all, southeastern Alaska. But what I'm really curious about is more of like the resources the credit union has to do some of these really special things, whether it's the microsites or the commons. At a certain point, Helen, you were a small credit union, right? I mean, you were on the small credit union committee. I think when you joined, your credit union was maybe a little bit above 100 million in assets.
Yeah.
But that's right at the cutoff of what we once defined a small credit union as. And knowing your operation and your organization, you're not like made of resources and people, right? Like you have resource constraints, you have capacity limitations. You can't do everything, I don't think. Although some of the things that you're sharing makes me think otherwise, sort of. but I think that for a lot of small credit unions who are listening, or who we work with, I think there's always a little bit of wariness on the board level or even at the management level, of taking on too much. Of saying this would be great. It would be great if we could make this investment or expand into this market or add this product, but we just don't have the capacity to do it. What I see in Tongass is that you've made those investments successfully, even in the face of some of these, what I would guess are some pretty significant resource constraints. And so my question for you, and this is off the list that I shared with you before the meeting, but I would ask you, why have you been successful in being able to invest in some of these things or roll out some of these things despite some of those resource constraints? Like, is there something that you could point to say, this is why, we're able to do it even when we don't have as many people as a larger financial institution?
I think that let's see, what are the things I want to share the most? We are a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. We're low income designated. And the first two community microsites we were opened with grant funds from the CDRLF, the NCUA's Community Development Financial Institution revolving, or what is it? Revolving loan fund. It's not a loan though. It's a grant. So it's their grant program through the NCUA. Let me just
Yeah.
make it short. Okay.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
And I got $50,000 grants for opening those sites. And that really did help us give us a leg up because we were a lot smaller even then. So we've been able to get grant funding that way. We've gotten grant funding through the CDFI program. And those have been very helpful. I feel like we partnered the core that we have. We all complain about our cores. There's always something that's not quite right or that whatever. But the core that we are on has been really good for being able to stand it up in our tiny sites. It hasn't been very expensive to get services out there. So working with our core has been a really helpful. It's CU Northwest, CU Base is who we're on.
Yep.
And I know a lot of small credit unions use them, and we have a really good online banking tool with that. But I think that's also been really helpful. And then I've been very fortunate in that we do have people in some key roles who really know their stuff. I think, my background in lending has been really good for the credit union because I know my stuff and I know what to expect on the lending side, which helps with income and getting loans out there. And so we've been very fortunate and blessed in a lot of ways, too. And then our services opening the community microsites, even if they're in small communities. I mean, Tongass is on an island with 14,000 people and 7 financial institutions. Okay. And this was the only place Tongass had ever been until we started, getting invited to Metlakatla and Thorn Bay and these other places. And so we really were very stagnant and not growing until we started doing that. We needed to do more or we were going to just be kind of hanging on. And so I think we've been able to grow. We've earned a little bit more money. We've been able to get grant funding. And so we've just kind of been taking the steps and opening the doors as they become available to us.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think, the CDFI piece is important. There are a lot of credit unions who I know of that would not be as successful as they are today had they not received that financial support. And actually, there is a credit union that I'm doing a remote planning session for, and I've been doing a bunch of research for them leading up to this planning session, which is on Monday in a couple days here. And they have no awareness really of the CDFI program. But the CEO, she comes from consumer finance and really understands risk-based lending, and like their average yield on loans is like 10%. And they even though they're not a CDFI, they operate like a CDFI, but their net income is projected to be $10,000 this year. And so think about a credit union like that. And I don't know if they've ever received CDRLF loans or grants, but that would be hugely impactful for them. CDFI grant would be hugely impactful for them, and give them, that extra sort of breathing room and those extra resources just to be able to scale up a little bit. And if you're well run and if you have the right leadership in place, and you're willing to take chances on some of these opportunities that present themselves, it can really start to snowball. And so, it sounds like that's kind of what happened with you guys. And you went from 24 million. So what was the asset size when you took over as CEO?
When I took over as CEO, we were 67 million in assets.
Okay.
And we're 240 million now, 10
Wow.
years later.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not all about the asset size. It's not all about growth for growth's sake. But I do think that when you see credit unions that grow exponentially or that grow fast, I think about Jessica Grosstick at Copper Basin and Terry Robinson at Ironworkers. The reason why they're growing so fast is because they're making an impact on their communities, because they're doing a good job serving their members and serving their communities, not just clicking a button and saying, let's grow, right?
Absolutely. And I think that is, you hit the nail on the head. It's like finding the community, finding the segment that you can serve. It was really easy for me to find who needs to be served, around here. I just mentioned them. That's where these microsites are. They had nothing. You go from nothing to something, and all of a sudden, wow, now we have, Thorn Bay, we've got 75% of the people who live there, all 500 of them or whatever, it's not even 500, 450, do their banking with us. And so we're finding those areas where they need us. And I think that's a huge piece, is like finding that segment, finding where the need is, because that's how we got started, how Tongass got started. We were started by teachers and public workers. The banks would not give the teachers a loan because of their seasonal income.
Mm.
And so they're like, fine, we'll open a credit union,
Yeah.
I mean, and so it's like, find the segment, and, and I think maybe those other credit unions have found the segment and where the need is, and then you grow.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, that's sort of our philosophy, Scott and my philosophy when we're doing planning sessions, is we're pushing credit unions to think about those segments that are being underserved. If you really want to grow, if you really want to add resources and revenue, I mean, and it's not just to do that. I mean, it's also the right thing to do. But if you're looking for a market opportunity for your organization, find the people, find the segments in the market that are being underserved, and you will not be disappointed, for sure. Okay, I do want to take a little bit of a shift here, shift gears, and talk a little bit about the bigger picture for the credit union movement. Big on my mind this week, especially, is the National Trade Association, because they just announced Scott Simpson, who is the former president and CEO of the California, Nevada, and Utah leagues, and someone who I've worked with in the past on small credit union events. He was just named as Jim Nussel's successor at America's Credit Unions. And so, thinking about the national picture and the big picture for the credit union movement, I know that's something that you care about, and something that's important to you. So, as you think about, sort of those national players, or, sort of the partners, business partners, trade associations, in the movement, what are some of the things that you would like to see, those groups do to help credit unions grow and help the industry and the movement be relevant long into the future?
Probably the first thing that comes to mind is we've got to have each other's backs. Whether you're a big credit union or a small credit union, we need to be supporting each other. And I think that the trade associations can be the conduit that makes sure that we're having the family conversations we need to have to maintain the movement as it really is. And we need to make sure that there's an understanding that, this member ownership is our superpower. We aren't banks. We're owned by our members. We need to really be leveraging that. We need to go back to our, our founding role of financial empowerment, right? We need to be the go-to industry for movement, industry, whatever you want to call it, for financial literacy and education. I mean, what I think it's extremely important that we get that message out there. I would love for it to be, if anyone is thinking about needing financial education, their first thought is, oh, I should check out what the local credit union's doing. And there's a lot of credit unions doing some really awesome stuff along those lines, but it should kind of be like the expectation across the movement, in my opinion. We need to be that solution. There's so many things changing in the financial services industry. We're going to have to stay on top of things too, thinking about stable coins and blockchain, and now we're dealing with AI. But how do we continue to make sure that we're modernizing what we're doing to continue to deliver, that tech is a tool, but we need to keep using it appropriately. I think we still, though, if we're going digital, we still need to be community anchors too. And as much as and this is probably just because I'm a small credit union, I can't write big checks necessarily, but I really hope that we are that community anchor in a way that we're actually participating in the community. I love that so many credit unions are doing financial reality fairs. We're hands-on in schools, and I think the more that we can be hands-on doing the work of financial education and doing the work of, bringing solutions to our communities, the more meaningful that we are too. And the demonstration of the, our founding role as, the deliverer of financial empowerment or literacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've said something similar on this podcast and just, to friends in the credit union industry in the past. And that is if credit unions, if the movement could figure out a way to be indispensable in the way that like a public library is indispensable,
Right.
or the way that, medical facilities are indispensable. I think that would be the transformational and sustainability creating sort of moment for the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how you do that is, I think, exactly what you're saying, which is to be the go-to resource not only for loans and savings, but for financial education at all levels and through every life stage of someone's financial journey, right? Like if you start at the school level and you have an in-school branch and you provide financial education at the school level and you work your way up all the way through high school, college, your first car, your first house, etc. And that there is a community credit union in your town that you can go to and go talk to someone who can teach you everything that you need to know about how to manage your personal finances. That makes you indispensable in the community. And I think that there needs to be, and I've said this before, there needs to be a way that we can make that sound fun and cool, especially for young people, in the
Mm-hmm.
way that like going to the gym is like, sort of like a cool, good, healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
Like gym memberships and you know, those things are social and socially sort of supported and acceptable. If we could make something similar, like going to the financial gym, and that credit unions are that financial gym, I think that could be really transformational and really, really cool, and make credit unions, really important to everyone and in their everyday lives. So I think there is a pathway there. The technology thing aside, I mean, to your point, credit unions have to stay abreast of technology. They have to be relevant to how people manage their money and make transactions and all that great stuff. But they also can provide this service that not many other financial institutions, if any, provide, which is around education and making sure consumers really know how to manage their money. So I think that's a good goal, and I hope we continue to move in that direction, because there are a lot of credit unions that already do it, right?
Right. I love your gym idea.
Yeah.
Now my mind just went off on that. How do we do this? How do we pair the gym and financial education together?
Well, there's like
Yeah.
there's a stigma around not knowing how to manage your finances, right? Like no one
Right.
freely admits that like they can't balance their checkbook, or they don't understand their credit report, or how their credit works. But like people say self-deprecatingly all the time, like, oh, I gotta get in shape.
Yep.
I haven't been to the gym in like 3 months, or man, I gotta start running again. People freely say those things and admit those things. And so if you could eliminate that stigma around finances, people would, I think, be more willing and more comfortable to go do that type of stuff and admit it to other people. And if credit unions are, welcoming, places to have those people come and learn, I think it'd be cool. It could be great.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
love it.
that's my crazy idea, Helen.
Uh,
Okay, so last question for you is back about Tongass again. I want to hear about your future plans. You've got some amazing things that you've already accomplished at the credit union in recent years and time. What's next? What's the big stuff that's on the horizon for Tongass into the future?
I don't know if I can give away my secrets.
Come on, at least one.
No, I do have a couple little secrets that aren't that groundbreaking, but I will keep those quiet. But we are looking to expand to serve all of Alaska.
Mm,
And so I'm hoping to get an approval for a field of membership expansion.
great,
And we'll be turning that in. And then, just knowing, working on the ways that we can deliver services in a modern way while still being, like I said before, a community anchor. I really feel like there are, there's changes. Everybody's doing this, is nothing new, but the way that branches are even changing and becoming less transactional, and utilizing ITMs more, and providing more advisory services in the branches. And how does that look in a community? And then that also leans into, being able to provide financial literacy and education and things too. If you're more of an advisory location than a transactional location, or the transactional side's getting taken care of maybe more automatically, and you're getting more employees doing some of the things that maybe are a little higher level. So we're looking at modernizing, and like I said, I think a lot of people are doing that, so it's not earth shattering. But I think it's important to continue to move in that direction, and Tongass will always be looking to do what we can to erase banking deserts in Alaska where we can, and then of course supporting the movement however we can. And one of the ways that Tongass has been very instrumental, you mentioned a little bit before, is the Native American Credit Union Coalition. I've been able to witness the change that has happened in Metlakatla over the last 20 years since we've been there. Credit union services make a difference. We were able to do an analysis and discovered that since Tongass has been in Metlakatla, their credit score, the median credit score there has gone up 74 points.
Wow.
74 points, because they have a credit union there offering, services, credit builder services and non-judgmental services to people who need help learning and understanding how to manage their credit. And then we have credit builder loans that help them build on that credit. And so now they're up 74 points compared to the state of Alaska in the same period, which has also gone up, but only 34 points. So I truly believe that what credit unions can offer and do in a community makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said, Helen. And thanks for sharing a little bit more about the NACUC, the Native American Credit Union Coalition. It truly has been an honor to, watch that group operate, and, provide some support where I can too, because, and you have been a champion for this cause for as long as I've known you. I remember we had a meeting scheduled to talk about how credit unions could better serve Native communities. Mm-hmm. And I was getting my haircut, and my haircut went late, and then I ended up having that phone call with you. And I think I sat in the parking lot of the place where I get my haircut for like 2 hours as we talked about, how we get credit unions onto Native lands, how we get more credit unions to buy into serving Native people. And so you have, definitely been the champion for that cause. But now, really fantastically, we have this group, comprised primarily of Native credit union professionals and leaders who are working to solve these challenges, and to lead the credit union industry and how it can better serve Native communities. And so encourage anybody to who's interested in that subject and that cause to please visit the website, or the LinkedIn page, and I'll drop those into the show notes as well. And yeah, so really, really great. And Helen, thank you so much for joining the podcast, Credit Union Nation. It's been a pleasure talking to you and learning your story. I loved hearing about your childhood growing up in Ketchikan, and I hope you'll come back and join us for future episodes.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you for all of you that you have done for the Native American Credit Union Coalition and small credit unions. I mean, yeah, you're a powerhouse, and I appreciate the work that you do in our industry too. So thanks for letting me be on today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Helen. Appreciate it.